They called them Unterseeboote, undersea boats. To the Allies, they were the dreaded U-boats, the silent hunters that stalked the frozen plains of the North Atlantic. To the men who served in them, they were home, fortress, and, all too often, their tomb.
To sign up for the U-Boot-Waffe, the German submarine arm, was to volunteer for a service branch with the highest casualty rate of any in the Wehrmacht. A staggering 75% of the men who went to sea in these iron coffins never returned. Out of approximately 40,000 men who served, over 28,000 perished in the cold, crushing depths. This is the story of why so few came home. It is a story not just of war, but of the terrifying collision between human endurance and the brutal indifference of technology and the sea.
Life aboard a U-boat was a descent into a world of sensory deprivation and overload. 50 to 60 men lived crammed into a steel tube no bigger than a modern subway car. For weeks, even months on end, they would not see the sun or breathe fresh air. The atmosphere inside was a foul cocktail of diesel exhaust, unwashed bodies, and the lingering stench of bilge water and cooking smells. Water was so severely rationed that bathing was an impossibility. Men returned to port wearing the same clothes they had left in, their beards grown long, their bodies etched with the grime of the sea.
In the early years of the war, the U-boat was the undisputed predator of the Atlantic. Grand Admiral Karl Donitz, a submarine veteran of the First World War and a brilliant tactician, unleashed his boats with devastating effect. He devised the wolfpack tactic, or Rodeltaktik, where multiple U-boats would converge on a convoy, overwhelming its defenses with coordinated, multi-pronged attacks, usually under the cloak of darkness. For the U-boat crews, this period became known as Die glückliche Zeit, the happy time. From July to October 1940, and again during the second happy time off the American coast in early 1942, the hunters had their fill. Allied defenses were weak and disorganized. Merchant ships sailed with their lights on. Coastal cities remained brilliantly illuminated, silhouetting the fat, slow-moving tankers and freighters for easy slaughter. The U-boats were sinking ships faster than the Allies could build them, threatening to sever Great Britain's lifeline to the rest of the world. For a time, it seemed as though Donitz might win the Battle of the Atlantic single-handedly. The allure of this success drew thousands of young, patriotic Germans to the submarine service. They were hailed as heroes, an elite force striking a mortal blow against the enemy. They were promised glory, honor, and the camaraderie of the deep. The grim reality of their service, however, was a far cry from the propaganda reels. The happy times were a fleeting illusion, a brief, deadly dawn before an endless night.
The slaughter in the Atlantic forced a brutal and rapid evolution. The Allies, with their backs against the wall, poured immense resources into anti-submarine warfare. The hunter was about to become the hunted. This wasn't a battle of ships against ships, but of minds against minds. First came the perfection of radar, especially airborne radar. Initially, U-boats were safest on the surface, where their diesel engines gave them greater speed and maneuverability. They would submerge only to attack or escape. But now, long-range patrol aircraft like the B-24 Liberator, equipped with microwave radar, could detect a surfaced U-boat from miles away, even at night or in thick fog. Suddenly, the surface was a death trap. The terrifying surprise of a bang, bang, bang from an unseen aircraft became a constant dread for every crewman. Beneath the waves, the odds were also turning. The British refined their underwater detection system, ASDIC, which we now know as sonar. While it had existed before, its use became more sophisticated. More importantly, the Allies developed new and deadlier weapons. Instead of dropping depth charges from the stern and hoping for the best, new forward-throwing weapons like the Hedgehog were introduced. This was a mortar that fired a pattern of 24 contact-fused bombs ahead of the attacking ship. A single hit could rupture a U-boat's pressure hull. There was no escape. But the most devastating blow was invisible. At a secret country estate in England known as Bletchley Park, Allied codebreakers, led by geniuses like Alan Turing, achieved the impossible. They cracked the German Navy's Enigma code. Suddenly, Admiral Donitz's most secret communications with his wolfpacks were being read by the enemy. The Allies knew where the U-boats were, where they were going, and where they planned to strike. Convoys were rerouted around the waiting hunters, and hunter-killer groups were dispatched to the U-boat's supposed secret locations. The wolfpacks were being ambushed.
To be on the receiving end of a depth charge attack was to experience a unique form of hell. Survivor Peter Peterson described it as an awful time, enduring 36 hours of constant bombardment. The men could do nothing but lie silent in the dark, listening to the creaks and groans of their own steel coffin. The shock waves from the explosions would violently shake the boat, throwing men across compartments and knocking out the lights. Glass gauges would shatter, and the dreaded cry of Wasserenbruch, water breach, would echo through the hull. Every rivet and weld was tested to its absolute limit. If the boat was forced too deep, the immense water pressure would simply crush the hull in a fraction of a second, an implosion so total that it would leave almost no trace. For the men inside, death would be instantaneous. But there was a fate even more terrifying than a quick implosion. Some boats were damaged but not destroyed, sent sinking to the ocean floor in shallower waters, unable to surface. Here the crew faced their final hours trapped in the dark, with no power, no hope of rescue, and a dwindling supply of oxygen. The ultimate horror wasn't being blown apart, but the slow, cold, suffocating wait for the end in a sunken steel tomb.
The psychological toll was immense. The periods of intense, gut-wrenching terror were punctuated by weeks of crushing boredom. The average age of a crewman was just 20 years old. As the war dragged on and experienced crews were lost, replacements became younger and their training more rushed. The seasoned aces of the happy times were replaced by boys who had barely learned to shave, commanded by officers sometimes as young as 24. Despite the staggering losses, especially during Black May of 1943, when 41 U-boats were lost in a single month, Donitz refused to relent. He felt the U-boat arm had a duty to relieve pressure on other fronts, to tie down Allied resources no matter the cost. His men, bound by duty and a powerful sense of camaraderie, continued to sail into what was, by 1943, almost certain death. They were no longer the hunters, they were the prey. For a U-boat crew, every patrol became a death sentence. There were no lifeboats, there were no escape pods. If a U-boat was hit, the chances of survival were almost zero. Trapped by fire, toxic chlorine gas from damaged batteries, or the inrushing sea, the end was swift and merciless. Of the 1,156 U-boats built by Germany, 784 were lost to enemy action or other causes. With them, they took the lives, dreams, and futures of over 28,000 men.
Why did so many never return? It was not one single reason,
but a cascade of failures and triumphs. It was the failure of German strategy to anticipate the speed of Allied innovation. It was the triumph of Allied codebreakers, scientists, and tacticians. It was the grim reality that Germany could never match the industrial might of the United States, which by 1943 was building ships far faster than the U-boats could sink them. But most of all, it was the inherent brutality of submarine warfare itself. Inside that steel tube, there was no room for error and no mercy to be found. The men of the U-Boot-Waffe were trapped between a determined, technologically superior enemy and the unforgiving pressure of the deep. They fought with courage and discipline, but they were caught in a war of attrition they could never hope to win. They sailed into the heart of the storm, into the cold, dark abyss, and for 3 out of every 4, the abyss never gave them back.